Reinhardt book, it says Yitzler was an honorable yak warrior. Any enemies that saw him put down their weapons in peace.
I find that concept fascinating. One, it's the story of a yak warrior more renowned for ending fights than winning them. None of the usual yak smash mentality. Secondly, it's the celebration of a warrior. My Little Pony's not shied away from the idea of violence as an option. Usually it's Rainbow Dash who was the first to start a brawl, but we've seen various characters use force when the situation demanded it. Yet MLP has consistently presented violence as an option, but not a solution. It's very rare that physical force yields a result, and when it does, it's not in the form of a fight. Yet if we look to our own histories, use of force is sometimes the only solution. Whether it be to throw off an oppressor or defend territory, the use of force has been a necessity. Why explore such an idea? Because learned scholars and psychologists, like Carl Jung, put forth the idea that the archetypes witnessed across multiple cultures represent part of the collective unconsciousness, a message from the depths of our own minds expressed through fiction. Archetypes embody aspects of our own psyche, and thus we often find ourselves drawn to characters who connect on this uniquely personal level. They have the ability to show us at our best and worst. Today's archetype, the warrior, is a key part of what Jung's student, Tony Wolff, described as part of the quaternary that forms the core of the male psyche. At his best self, an emotionally and mentally healthy man combines the drive of the warrior with the skill of the magician, the connectedness of the lover, and offers these combined strengths in service to the king. The end result being a balanced psyche that can foster both oneself and the surrounding community. And yes, I think you can find examples of such archetypes within a show originally marketed towards young women. I think this is a good thing because it can help show young women examples of guys at their best and perhaps help them avoid negative relationships. The problem is that, as a culture, we've become afraid of the warrior within, mostly because we've made the big mistake of glorifying its destructive shadow aspects. It's that fear that I think has denied characters like Shining Armor a chance to show their best. And so in lieu of a pony example, I shall instead draw upon a video game character. One who embodies not only the warrior's strengths, but also the winding path to reach this state. You should be here any minute.
Reinhardt, at your service!
Oh, I feel very out of place in this animation style. Yet it is here in the German city of Eichenwald that this story ends? Yes, as we fade in, our lead character, Reinhardt Wilhelm, is getting an earful from his young squire and goddaughter, Brigitte Lindholm.
This isn't your fight.
This is a technique known as the frame story. Reinhardt is faced with a decision, but to understand the weight of it, we have to flash back and experience his life. For that, we must travel back several decades to the start of the Omnic crisis. Sentient AI that rose up against mankind and caused him? No, the other fictional robot rebellion. Okay, I get it, it's been done before, now will you please make with the Omnics? Thank you. So, classic trope. Mankind creates something it doesn't fully understand and can't control. The end result is a war for survival, with each country finding its own solution. Fighting a machine means fewer vulnerable spots and stronger materials. A rocket or similar explosive might get the job done, but if the approaching army closes the gap, then handguns and even rifles won't make the cut. So, Germany created soldiers that could deliver massive crushing force in a concentrated spot. These are the Crusaders. Men and women equipped with massive armor that featured rockets in the back, shield generators in one arm, and a giant hammer in the other. One such Crusader is a younger Lieutenant Reinhardt. He is very full of himself.
The Crusaders are immortal defenders of Germany. People will be singing songs about our legacy.
Key focus here is younger. For just as there are archetypes that represent a healthy adult, there are also archetypes that represent the healthy development of a child. The warrior's younger self is defined as the hero. At their best, a hero is someone who represents the young drive to establish identity, to test the bounds of what other people consider to be impossible, and in doing so discover one's own limits. The young Reinhardt is not an example of this, because he succumbed to one of the hero's shadows, the grandstander, aka the bully. This Reinhardt is so assured of his greatness that he doesn't even acknowledge the idea of limits. The passive shadow of the hero is the coward, represented by one of Reinhardt's fellow soldiers.
He wishes he got picked.
Granted, mouthing off to a giant in armor and carrying a big old hammer isn't something one should rush into. Yet this unnamed soldier is relying on passive-aggressive whispers instead of confronting the problem. That problem being that Reinhardt is so glory-hungry he often abandons his team to rack up kills. At the time of this video, one of the top Reinhardt players in the Overwatch League goes by CloneMan16. I have no doubt this person will wipe the floor with me in a game, yet even CloneMan16 cannot fight as well as Reinhardt in this cinematic. Dude is mowing down Omnics left and right while the rest of his team is pinned. Of course, young Reinhardt won't grow as a person without some guidance. Fortunately, he has a much more stable mentor in the form of Baldric von Adler.
Live with honor.
Die with glory!
Von Adler has experienced what authors Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette call a transpersonal commitment. He has devoted himself to ending the war and saving as many lives as possible. This is a goal that transcends personal ego and thus enables him to rise above the same traits holding back Reinhardt. This isn't about killing the enemy, but instead averting deaths. One could argue that, given the body count on both sides, the end results are the same. We'll address the ideas of intention shortly, but let's pause to look at this scenario. A young hotshot who has no concept of limitations, a grizzled veteran and father figure. Both of them are in a war zone. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave this here. Sure enough, the battle shifts as a new enemy takes to the field. Here is where the grandstander undermines Reinhardt. He charges in head first and loses an eye. He'd lose a great deal more if not for Von Adler. And how thankful is our young not-hero?
I had this!
Obviously.
But as the battle turns into a rout and the Crusaders have to retreat, Reinhardt and Von Adler are forced to part ways. At first, the young grandstander thinks it's all about the glory, but a moment's clarity reveals that this is meant to be Von Adler's last stand. Suddenly, all that bravado vanishes.
I won't leave you!
The team needs you. Be their shield.
And Reinhardt does just that. As the last of the troops are about to be mowed down, it's Reinhardt, shed of ego, who stands in the way and works on his true catchphrase.
Barrier is failing!
Even when the shield gives way, Reinhardt uses his body to protect his comrades. Not for attention or a part in history, but to fulfill a promise and an obligation. This is Reinhardt both tapping into positive heroic energy, but also facing the boundary between a youthful hero and a mature warrior. That boundary is death. Even the greatest of heroes in history or mythology cannot overcome this challenge. Death is the final threshold, the inevitable end we will all face.
Death is the ultimate fairness. Rich and poor, young and old, all are equal in death.
This likely sounds pessimistic or defeatist, but the warrior above all else represents the drive to move forward. There's no space for wasted time or action. You are alive right now, so now is the most important moment. A person who is channeling the warrior acts with decisiveness, willing to endure pain or adversity in pursuit of a transpersonal commitment. And while Reinhardt is taking the first true step towards realizing his inner warrior, Von Adler is about to display it in full. One might wonder, as he dons that helm, what he's thinking about. I can tell you, nothing. In addition to drive, the warrior archetype also represents focus and detachment. A warrior is not hindered by emotions or regrets. It's about living in the moment and focusing on the goal. Yes, in Von Adler's case it involves slaying opponents to safeguard his soldiers, but this drive doesn't always have to be expressed through violence. If you have to pull an all-nighter to prepare for a test or complete a project, that is you channeling the warrior's energy. If you want to win at a game or achieve a promotion or create your own business, the warrior prevents you from being too concerned with your opponent or rival's feelings. Success requires drive, and it's the warrior who pushes us towards that. Von Adler's final moments are spent defending lives. He's only thinking about what's right in front of him and how to overcome it. Again, one could argue that the result is the same if he simply wanted to kill Omnics. And it's true that in a singular moment, intentions may seem immaterial against action and results. Yet, nothing is ever a singular event. There's always consequence. In Reinhardt's case, Von Adler served as a reminder of what's really important. The Colonel was set to join Overwatch, a strike team drawn from multiple countries to end the Omnic crisis. Reinhardt joined in Von Adler's place and took to heart his mentor's example. Yet even then, he wasn't a true warrior. Reinhardt had faced his own mortality, but he'd not yet come to understand his own limits. That would be his challenge over the course of the war and beyond. And in time, Overwatch ended the Omnic crisis and transitioned to a global peacekeeping force. Reinhardt, now committed to the ideals of chivalry, became Overwatch's greatest proponent in the public eye and the harshest critic within the organization. He wanted this group to live up to the ideals Von Adler expressed, and to nurture humanity to become better. In this regard, Overwatch failed. It started with an attack on an Overwatch base by a criminal organization, Talon. The covert ops Blackwatch team was sent to extract the guilty party, but they turned that into an assassination. The whole event was a PR disaster and led people to question Overwatch's role as a global defender. Reinhardt would help them win back some goodwill when he led a strike team to liberate the King's Row section of London from an extremist group's occupation. The team succeeded in part because, unlike Blackwatch, they didn't lose sight of the larger goal: save lives. But that would be one of his last roles. Reinhardt was in his 50s and nearing forcible retirement. And so this soldier who gave all he had became an observer as Overwatch succumbed to infighting and external attacks. When the organization disbanded, Reinhardt had to choose what to do next. This is where intention and the transpersonal commitment come into play. Overwatch had been the representation of what he believed, a king to his knight, and yet those ideals had not died with Overwatch. The game's senior vice president of creative design, Chris Metzen, described Reinhardt as a kinda Don Quixote, and there are a lot of similarities. Both Reinhardt and the character written by Miguel de Cervantes hold a very romanticized view on chivalry. Both became knights errant. Both have an active imagination, with Reinhardt seeing gang members as dragons, and Don Quixote mistaking windmills for giants. But there are some important differences. Don Quixote is so enamored with fictional chivalry that he has no awareness. He's living in a dream, not the moment. This often leads to misadventures, with him getting beat up or humiliated. Reinhardt takes his share of punishment as well, but for very different reasons. His experience as a soldier and peacekeeper helped him become aware of his own limits and his surroundings. He takes a beating because doing otherwise would put innocence in the crossfire. But then he tends to his wounds, armors up, and finishes the fight. When Don Quixote charges at windmills, it's an expression of the impossible task he's undertaken. Not because it's an ideal, but he's relying on idealism to carry the day without training or preparation. What about when Reinhardt imagines dragons? Well, I think he's seen the problems that plague the world. Western mythology depicts dragons as angry, violent, greedy, and ultimately selfish. It's the same vices that undermined Overwatch. The freestanding dragon represents the gang as a whole, and its members are possessed or infected by its aspects. This leads to the biggest difference between Quixote and Reinhardt. Quixote was so blinded by his fantasies that he couldn't understand the world around him, and his actions were so strange that the world rarely understood him. Reinhardt may have an imagination, but he also knows how tempting it feels to act like a bully, or how small one can feel in a terrible moment. By being aware of his shadow side and accepting rather than denying it, he becomes a stronger person who does understand others. I think it's for this reason he spares the gangsters, even if a more tactically minded warrior might slay them. His commitment is to giving mankind the chance to become better, hence he offers the gang a warning, with some concussions and likely broken bones. This is how warriors often go by the oxymoron creative destroyers. When a threat arises, warriors stand up and fight for those who can't fight for themselves. They throttle the life out of the threat and then step aside. They give the world room to grow. Much like that yak warrior mentioned at the start, it wasn't the lives he took that made him a legend, it was how he averted death just through his presence. It's the same when Reinhardt acts in defense of an injured Omnic back in King's Row. Let's pause to appreciate this. Omnics killed his mentor. They were the enemy, but for Reinhardt, it wasn't about killing them. It was to prevent genocide and create room for a new world to grow. When Reinhardt raises that shield, it's not just for the sake of one being who shouldn't be punished for someone else's actions. It's also in defense of those who would attack. By blocking their assault, he's saving them from making a mistake. Maybe one day they'd regret it, maybe not. Yet it would be a mistake either way. Which brings us back to the choice. The world has not gotten better since Overwatch's disbandment. Crime and violence are on the rise, and a fresh war with the Omnics looms. Many people, including the vigilante Soldier 76, are possessed by the warrior's aggressive shadow, the sadist. While they may proclaim they're fighting injustice or negative forces, the real goal is to punish and hurt others. Soldier 76 spends more time beating up one gang member than he does shutting down their operation.
These aren't your streets anymore!
Still others are possessed by the masochist's energy, like Hanzo. No matter how skilled, they believe that they are powerless to change anything and put themselves at the world's mercy.
Real life is not like the stories our father told us. You were a fool for believing it so.
The world needs some of Reinhardt's craziness. The belief that one can change things for the better, unified with the skill and drive to accomplish such a goal. Former Overwatch scientist Winston, yes, he is a gorilla, has sent the call out to former agents. To rejoin Overwatch would make them all vigilantes, and yet he's asking anyway.
Are you with me?
But Reinhardt is in a strange place. He's one of the oldest members. He's been through so much already and is now in his 60s. Most of the world thinks he's a criminal. Even more think he's a relic. His own team has told him he's too old, and arguably they dropped the ball. And for all he's given, the most he can show is a network of scars and lost friends. And so we reach the choice, the entire reason for this frame story.
I have been called. I must answer. Always.
For all of his loud boasts and goofy expressions, Reinhardt represents the warrior at its best. Focused, balanced, devoted to a cause that nurtures growth. With this in mind, there's the question of why we're so afraid of the warrior. Certainly, we see signs of violence committed, even in the name of a cause. The cause becomes an outlet for a sense of powerlessness, which leads to blind anger. It's not about creating something new or fixing a flawed system, it's asking, who can I hurt right now to make myself feel better? It's why intentions do count, because a person channeling the warrior will challenge their own attitudes and make sure they're being honest with their motives. Having the right intentions may not prevent a mistake or save us from ourselves, but it can help with whatever comes next. And if stories can help shape our views and beliefs, why have we moved away from seeing warriors in our own mythology? Much of my childhood featured characters fighting for ideals. Looking to modern-day entertainment, it seems like anyone who wants to act like a warrior is often undermined by their own ego and becomes a parody. There are exceptions like Voltron, Legendary Defender, but it's becoming much less common. I think we did this to ourselves because we glorified violence and neglected to show the warrior at its best. When I think of the classic 80s action heroes and those of the modern day, how balanced are their lives?
Get divorced. Your wife can't remember your last name. Kids don't want to talk to you. You have to eat a lot of meals by yourself. Trust me, kid, nobody wants to be that guy.
These guys are terrible. They can't express themselves through any means other than violence. They can't be centered in the moment or build anything. They define themselves by the harm they inflict. The only reason we cheer for them is because they're fighting someone worse, but take that away and they become the destructive force themselves. We've glorified the sadist when we should be asking what a real warrior would do. And much like Reinhardt, it's okay to show a character growing into the role. I think Avatar: The Last Airbender accomplished this. So did Samurai Jack. Yet other characters like Shining Armor are held back. He's become endearing for other traits, especially his reaction to becoming a father, but if you ask me if he's able to live up to his role as captain of the guard, I have a lot of doubts. I think it's okay to show a character who uses violence as an option, but a responsible portrayal emphasizes the person is tempered and balanced. Changing and protecting the world requires drive and often requires force. The real question is to ask, why are you using that force and how far does it go? Don't be afraid of the warrior. It's a part of who we are and can lead to growth. Instead, we need to be mindful of what can happen when we lose our balance. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's time for the play of the review. Oh, come on! I only used him for one clip. I'm Silver-Quill, and I appreciate anyone who doesn't spam storm arrows. Thanks for watching. Bleh.
Today with your techno music. You should enjoy the classics like Hasselhoff. Much better.